everyone. I'm so happy to have this new episode of our podcast, the HyperNest podcast. During those episodes, we talk with some of the most talented founders in the DeFi space, and we try to understand a little bit better how DeFi protocols works, mechanism design, what are the innovations out there, and what will come next. Today, I have the great pleasure to have two of the most talented founders I know that are also part of our portfolio company, HyperNest portfolio company, Thomas and ApeGuru. And I'm so excited to talk about Solidly. In particular, I would like to go into details of Solidly DEXs, how they are different from other DEXs, how the emission works, and also what is the future of DEXs, considering now the proliferation of so many DEXs that use the v3,3 model. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, I would love to have a brief intro from Thomas and ApeGuru.
Great. Shall I start?
So, yes, please, Thomas, start.
Thank you, Alessio, for hosting this. Love to hear. So I started working in DeFi Summer in different protocols focused in the product side of things, work at a crypto collateralized mortgages for the US protocol back in 2020. Then I joined the Fuse network where I led the DeFi efforts, co-founded Voltage Finance. That was the main DeFi hub at Fuse, where we implemented the first type of let's call it B tokenomics to our protocol. We were planning to implement also voting and bribing to it. So since the beginning, we've been working with this, and currently working on a B33 focused product right now after leaving Fuse.
Very nice. Thanks a lot for the fantastic intro. ApeGuru, do you want to go next?
Yes, sir. So I'm Ignacio, mainly known as ApeGuru in the DeFi space and on Twitter. I'm one of the co-authors of ERC 5725, which is an Ethereum standard to describe the vesting of assets over time, which is well applied to B tokenomics and B tokens in general, particularly those that are represented by NFTs. I co-founded ApeSwap in early 2021, entirely bootstrapped it with a team of 5 and grew the protocol from 0 to over 750 million in TVL, scaling the team from 5 to over 33 people, successfully navigated the bear market during the basically food coin frenzy and its downfall, pivoting into a bonding protocol now called Avon, which is successfully being run by a newly named CEO and operating profitably during this market. Lately, with all the knowledge I developed during my times in ApeSwap, particularly running the DEX side of things, I started diving deeper into the Solidly model, its benefits, its drawbacks, and its potential enhancements. And this led me to founding Linux, which is currently the biggest B33 DEX in the Linea ecosystem.
That's fantastic. So I'm so glad to have you both here, two heavy hitters, founders, ultra DeFi focused. And I'm so excited to have this discussion with you today. Maybe you want to provide, before we enter a little bit in the nitty-gritty of mechanism design, maybe you want to spend a couple of words about Linux and why basically opting for a v3,3 model and why Linea?
That's a great question. So the TLDR of Linux and how I see it, of course, I see it as an iteration and evolution of existing B33 and Solidly DEXs. The aim of Linux is to lower the barrier of entry for liquidity providers by connecting them to liquidity managers, which I'm sure we're going to further discuss down the line. I chose the B free model because I think it creates a strong incentive alignment between basically all the market participants, the token holders, the liquidity providers, the traders. Everyone has this incentive alignment and this positive feedback loop and flywheel that keeps the ecosystem healthy and flourishing. We chose Linea as the ecosystem to deploy, which I will share with a quick story around it. So basically, one day, my MetaMask wallet decides to update, and I see that below Ethereum, they add Linea as a default chain. And as a crypto user for the past 5 years, I quickly realized, okay, this is the first time that MetaMask actually forces a chain into my UI. And this drove me to do some research like, hey, this is actually going to be big. MetaMask is objectively the biggest wallet, and they are pushing a layer 2 in my face. So I did some research. I arrived to the conclusion that, well, Linea is being built by Consensus, which are the founders and owners of MetaMask. And then from here on, for me, it was kind of a no-brainer. I think that MetaMask has been the most used wallet. It's potentially the best distribution channel for DeFi user acquisition. So I do believe that Consensus can leverage MetaMask to onboard new users into Linea, and this provides this layer 2 an unfair competitive advantage over pretty much any blockchain out there. I don't think that any blockchain can directly tap into the users of the most used wallet. And after I arrived to this conclusion, it was like, okay, I'm going to build on Linea. I'm going to leverage all the knowledge I have in DEX infrastructure and try to build the most capital efficient DEX within this ecosystem. And well, the rest is history, I guess.
I really like the run through, from capital efficiency to why Linea. So very, very good. And now I really would like to do a little bit of step back, because I think that not everyone is completely aware of the differences between the classical Uniswap model, so no fee switch whatsoever, at least for now, the curve model, and the original V token economy that then inspired so many other iterations, and then the baby born of André Cronje, or Cronje, depends on the way you see the world, that is basically the V3,3 model, and therefore Solidly. Maybe I'm sure that one of you guys can provide probably a good run through of what are the most important differences between these three models.
Great.
Definitely.
So, yeah, I think we can do it more like a conversation. In my opinion, I think the difference between all of those is that Uniswap, that is the pioneer of the DEXs. You're already aware of how they are distributing their fees, and also regarding the utility of the token. In my opinion, to what Curve tried to do and what Andre ended up solving, also an issue we had back in the day on Fuse, was the utility of the token and the fee sharing and activity that the users were supposed to do in the protocol. So I think that the main difference would be the token utility and fee sharing on the different protocols, where I think the Solidly forks are the best solution for fee sharing and emissions, where they share the fees to voters and they give emissions to LP providers, where in Uniswap you don't have that situation. And in terms of Curve, it's a different situation where the voters don't get the fees, but they get the emissions. I think Guru can have a more specific input into those, but I think
Definitely, I can make some. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
So I can make like some contrasts between these models and outlining what I think are like the key differences. So yeah, starting for the Uniswap model, as probably everyone knows, it doesn't really have token value accrual. I mean, now we do have Unichain, potential sequencer fees, etc., but this doesn't necessarily relate to the DEX side of things. So on the Uniswap model, the TLDR is that the liquidity providers gets 100% of the fees. The token behind the protocol is a governance token with zero value accrual. That's kind of the key points behind the Uniswap model. Then we have the next iteration, which is the curve model. The curve model does have token value accrual. It basically splits the fees 50-50 between the liquidity providers and the B curve token holders. Mentioning B curve is a soul-bound version of the curve token that is locked for up to 4 years. The longer you lock, the higher your value accrual or your voting power is. Nevertheless, a drawback that Curve has against Solidly, that is going to come shortly, is that all the voters receive the same share of fees regardless of their voting behavior. And in my opinion, this is what Solidly fixes. Because like if everyone receives the same amount of fees regardless of voting behavior, malicious voting is not penalized. You can basically vote for unproductive liquidity for free. So this kind of breaks the incentive model. Like you actually need to incentivize productive emissions or earn less money. So if you want to actually vote for unproductive emissions, you should be penalized on the revenue that you get from the protocol. And here is where the Solidly model comes in. So first of all, different than Curve, the Solidly model, or most Solidly models, because I know there are a few Solidly models that actually give fees to the liquidity providers. Most Solidly models give 100% of the fees to the B token holders. Additionally, different from Curve, the B token is not represented by a soul-bound token. It's actually represented by an NFT, which means that the B token, even though it can't be directly sold on the market, it could be considered as a semi-liquid asset because an NFT has transferability, and this transferability enables you to sell the asset on a secondary marketplace, which again gives more utility to the B tokens on this model. And finally, as I was mentioning, in the Solidly model, you get rewarded relative to your voting behavior. So if you vote for productive liquidity, you're going to earn more money than if you vote for unproductive liquidity, which is, in my opinion, one of the biggest drawbacks of Curve. And I think it can be like basically the bane of Curve. Like I don't think that I don't think that this is sustainable. Basically, paying people to vote for unproductive liquidity, in my opinion, is not sustainable. I don't want to doom call Curve, but I think it's a massive problem with this model, which the Solidly model addresses perfectly. And well, another thing to finally add is that both the Curve model and the Solidly model do have a bribe system to also incentivize the voters to vote in certain direction. And this is a way for like third-party protocols that have unproductive liquidity to incentivize voting behavior towards their unproductive liquidity, because they are basically paying a premium over the fees or competing to more productive pools like ETH USDC that generates a lot of fee revenue.
Okay, well, first of all, thanks a lot for unpacking all of it. I think, okay, first I'll try to summarize it. So we have Uniswap, where basically there isn't a specific value accrual for the token holders, and therefore the fee just go back to the liquidity providers. This is basically model number one, fees which never been executed, and potentially, in the future we're going to see a value accrual, but it's connected to Unichain, so this is a little bit outside the current discussion. For curve finance, you can lock your token, they become the V curve, and in that specific situation, the fee generated will be split 50-50 between the liquidity providers and the stakers. The main, let's say, downside that we see here that is that the emission are distributed to the stakers. This is not really related to their voting behavior. So if they're just staking, they're going to get emission. So they might potentially incentivize pool that are not productive, that are not generating any revenue for the rest of the people. And now we get to the Solidity V3,3, where we have a full, let's say, alignment, where in most of the case, but not always, 100% of the emission go to the stakers, so the V holders, and their emission, the fee that they get, is connected to the pools that they decide to incentivize, and therefore there is a strong incentive for them to essentially direct the emission on the pool that generate more revenue, right? So is it without touching on the bribes. Is it a kind of an okay summary?
Yes, sir. That's a great summary. And while we are at it, we can also bring up like something that happened in the middle. Let's say Sushi, PancakeSwap is something that is kind of in the middle of both of these models. I mean, PancakeSwap does have a B token right now, but not exactly as the Solidly model. But if we go off Sushi, for example, which is not that far from PancakeSwap, they basically take, I believe, 30% of the trading fees, and then the value of these 30% of the trading fees across the whole DEX accrue to X Sushi, which is not a locked token, it's such as is a Sushi derivative token that accrues value from these 30% of the fees. There is governance power, but X Sushi doesn't really direct emissions, which is like something that happened in the middle. At the end of the day, Sushi kinda invented liquidity mining to some degree. So they do have this model to compensate with their emissions, but they only take 30% of the LP tokens. And relative to the core model or the Solidly model, and also without having the lock-in aspect, I do believe it's a less powerful tokenomics. Nevertheless, it's worth bringing up this other DEX tokenomics model.
Of course, of course. I think also to add a comment there, the Sushi model is the most forked, I think, protocol in DeFi, in the whole DeFi space.
Probably.
And the issue that it has is that the tokenomics are inflationary because of the master chef, and the revenue generating the revenue distributing model that it has, it's not efficient at all. Also because it's not asking users to do anything, either lock the tokens. So what happened to us is that we decided to add a B token model because we wanted the users to engage actively in the protocol, and also we wanted to distribute revenue to people performing and helping the protocol, contributing something to the protocol. So I think Curve kind of partially solved it, but Andre was the mastermind that could definitely find the best option to make this more efficient, right?
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And I think it was a beautiful, run through in the history of DEXs and token economy.
Definitely.
Right? It was, a lot of also nostalgia from my side.
Yes, I held my Solidly to 0. I actually migrated it to SolidX, and then I held my SolidX to 0.
Yeah, I mean, hard candy, I remember that, But I think there is just a little detail that I think we are assuming is clear for everyone, but it might not. And the dynamic where usually V token holders, they need to vote for the different pools or the pools to direct the emission of one of the protocol, right? That it's something that it's, I think, very, very rooted in the economic design of Curve Finance and, of course, all the Solidly forks. Do you want to add anything to that? Because I think we are assuming that everyone knows about it, but I think it is a very important part of the mechanism design.
Definitely. So, yes, go ahead, sir.
I was just gonna say that the only thing that the Solidly model or B33 model needs is like an active management. That was the case in the beginning, but currently that the issue is being addressed. And also for a lot of newcomers into the space, it can be a super complicated model to handle. So definitely it's for a niche type of user that wants to actively be engaged in DeFi and really understand what he's doing. But I think Guru can add more on how Linux it's amazingly addressing these issues, right?
Yeah, definitely. So in the Solidly model in general, or I think every single Solidly DEX does it this way, except Velocore that actually streams the rewards. But in general, you actually get the rewards and the missions determined on a weekly basis. So once per week, a vote is executed to determine the mission allocation for the following week. So all the B token holders need to actually participate on this voting to earn their share of the fees. Otherwise, if they don't activate their voting power, let's say they don't utilize their B tokens, they are actually forfeiting their share of the fees, which get redistributed across all those voting participants. As Thomas said, like this has been addressed by a few protocols. In the case of Linux, and our approach is like we believe that the liquidity managers such as Gamma, Ichi, DeFi Edge, Steer, and others, like they are the ones that know the shop the best in a way. I mean, they are managing the liquidity, they have their own algorithm, they are optimizing for capital efficiency. So our thesis was, hey, let's empower the liquidity managers. Let's put the liquidity managers at the heart of the whole protocol. So under this train of thought, we set aside, which was a pretty complex implementation, to build a strong delegation system within the B token protocol. So basically, on Linux, the users can choose to delegate their voting power to a liquidity manager, and then the liquidity manager manages the vote of these users across all the liquidity options, removing the need to execute on weekly voting for the users, while also empowering the liquidity managers to control emissions, while creating strong incentive alignment across all participants. Because at the end of the day, if the liquidity manager wants to make more money, they need more TVL. To get more TVL, they need more emissions. And to get more emissions, they need more voting power. And to get more voting power, what they need to do to make more money for the holders. The more money that they make for the holders, the more voting power they are going to get. So the liquidity manager is basically there saying, okay, if I want to make more money, I need to make more money for everyone that holds the token. So in a way, we have a bunch of liquidity managers competing among each other to see who makes more money for billings holders, which in my opinion creates like this symbiotic relationship between the liquidity manager, the protocols, and the liquidity providers and the B token holders, where basically the value is maximized for everyone, and while they compete among each other, they are constantly aiming to generate more fees for the B token participants. And this, in a nutshell, is how the Linux governance works and how we address the issue of having to actively vote every week, particularly if you're an uneducated user or you don't have time to vote. Then in other models, such as, let's say, Aerodrome and Velodrome, they have these contracts where you can actually deposit your B token. It's not necessarily a delegation system, but you deposit your B token, people vote on behalf of your B token, and then execute strategies relative to your vote. I think it's a decently powerful system. I mean, you do need to give up custody of your B token to this third-party smart contract, but basically you enable someone to manage your B token on your behalf. Nevertheless, this system doesn't necessarily revolve around liquidity managers. It's mostly an utility system. And also, like in many cases, it's just like a revenue or fee maximizer system that it might not be aligned towards the longevity of the protocol, like as the actual revenue and fees you might get could be skewed by bribes a lot or like short-term volatility and might not be the most beneficial use of emissions for the following week. And in a high level, it's basically those models. One model is delegation, which I think that Linux has basically the only implementation of delegation system in the B free space. And the other model is giving your BNFT to a manager smart contract.
Yeah, like I think you're referring to actor like the hidden hand. Is that right?
Yeah, the hidden hand is like, in the case of Aerodrome, they did it in-house. Then you have the example of Tina, where they actually did it via a third party, which is called the hidden hand. And again, the hidden hand, basically, you deposit your BNFT on the hidden hand, and they are going to maximize your voting power. They have like an off-chain algorithm that computes the most optimal voting strategy. They vote on your behalf, and then you just need to claim the rewards on a weekly basis.
Yeah. Or they can even auto-compound, right? In case.
Yes, they can auto-compound, true.
Okay, so to summarize, I think, so the old Linux economic model create an ecosystem where First of all, the liquidity providers are the real winner. They are the real winner because not only from an economical perspective they win, but also I want to say from a UX perspective, because understanding 100% how a Solidly model works and where you need to vote every week in order to maximize your revenue is not something that any anon out there can do. But specifically in Linux, you can basically just delegate your vote to an ALM, an automatic liquidity managers, and all the automatic liquidity managers competing between one each other, they compete to generate more yield that ultimately go back to the V token holders. Therefore, there is a flywheel that create more value for everyone and also a better UX. That was basically the type of structure that we have in Linux, whereas other actors decided for other solutions that can be also with third-party protocol like the hidden hand. Okay, I think that now that we broke a little bit the ice in this beautiful world of Solidly, we should talk a little bit about the relationship between emission and yields, right? I think a complex and articulated relationships, because of course, as soon as an ALM or the V token holders start to vote for one specific pool, of course the yield on that pool tend to increase, then potentially the liquidity in that specific pool increase, and therefore emission and yields are intrinsically interconnected. Even if the token price go up, then of course the value of the emission go up, and therefore also these have an impact on the yield. So I would like to ask you to both of you, to unpack a little bit this intricate interconnection between emission and yield.
Great. Wow. Okay. So I think the good thing about Solidly, the Solidly model, is that it found a way to give some kind of value to the token in order to be able to give a constant yield, and a yield that it's not like an inflationary token that whenever it goes down it will draw down the whole protocol, as the sushi type of model, where at the beginning, as you remember, yields were crazy. Everything was going up until they were not, and that's when most of the DEXs died. So in this case, where you have a lot of tokens locked and you take a lot of the tokens out of circulation, and you're asking users to vote into the pools producing the most amount of volume and driving up liquidity, in this way you can make sure that the value of these emissions is going to hold, and it's not going to be an inflationary mechanism to pay to liquidity providers. So I think this is a super interesting model that found how to keep the value of the token in a sense that nobody's going to be dumping it, and that's going to be drawing down the whole protocol with it, right? So yeah, in the sushi way, what used to happen is that at the beginning incentives were crazy for all farms, but at the end of the day, because everybody was selling it straight away in order to capitalize that yield, the whole incentives ended up going down. Also, I think a good implementation for this are the options on the reward. I'm sure Guru can get more deep into it, but I think it's one of the coolest innovations I've seen lately on Linux. So yeah, I don't know, Guru, if you want to talk a little bit more about it.
So yeah, I mean, what I would definitely add is that this is 100% an inflationary model. I mean, I do consider it an inflationary model because at the end of the day, you are inflating the token supply in the form of emissions that goes to liquidity providers. Nevertheless, when you factor the locking mechanism, if there is like a strong incentive to lock your tokens, like even though you have emissions that are literally being minted every week from scratch to go to the liquidity providers, you might have weeks where you are actually in a way partially deflationary, because if you have more B token locks than the emissions you produce that week, your actually circulating supply it's going down. So even though this is an inflationary model, the V tokenomics enables the actual inflation to occur without having a material impact, as you were describing in sushi. Like in sushi, there is no incentive to actually lock the token. Now you have X sushi, but the APR of X sushi is like 7%. When you compare it with Velodrome or Aerodrome that are more established, it's like 40 to 50%. And also Sushi is not locked. So even though both models are inflationary to some degree, like with the B tokenomics, you actually have this incentive to lock the tokens. So you are in a way reducing the circulating supply, and you can actually achieve a delta that is negative in the circulating supply on a weekly basis. And then in a way, like the way that the yield is relative to emissions, I think it goes back to the voting power to some degree. So like assuming that the token has a fixed price, like if you have an increased voting power for a given week relative to the previous week for, let's say, ETH/USDC, this is going to have more emissions for ETH/USDC, and therefore it's going to increase the absolute amount of tokens going to ETH/USDC liquidity providers, therefore increase the APR and the yield of this pool. So at the end of the day, the yield is proportionally to the amount of emissions that are assigned to a specific liquidity strategy and the token price of the underlying asset that is used as rewards for liquidity providers.
And of course, the token price, of course, have an impact on that, right? Because if it goes up 10x, also, the value of the emission will be reflected in the type of yield that can be served to the users, right? And the other way around too.
100%, yes.
Okay, I think that we had, several discussion between us, discussing about the efficiency of the many Solidly fork out there, and we were trying to monitor, the composition, if I call it, I can call it that way, of the redistribution of fee, right? Because this redistribution of fee usually have on a very high level two components, right? Assets. Crypto assets can be, of course, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and whatever we have been voting for. And the second one is, of course, the protocol emission, right? And usually the percentage, exactly the composition of this fee, somehow it can be an indicator of the efficiency, of lack of efficiency of one specific Solidly fork. Do you want to unpack a little bit this concept? Because I think that many, of the audience, people in the audience might not consider these, but I think it is of a very, very great importance in this specific Solidly model.
Definitely. So the way I like to think about efficiency in a Solidly model, which is a metric that I use myself, but I'm sure that many people have their own name for this metric, and many Solidly forks do their own analysis of this. But the way I see it is like the efficiency is determined by the return over emissions. So how much money does the protocol make on fees and bribes for every dollar that you send to the liquidity provider? So let's say, I'm gonna do like a flashback to HSwap and the super inefficient times back there. Like when we were like minting banana in HSwap, we were doing roughly 15% of return over emissions, which this basically means that for every dollar in banana that went to liquidity providers, we made 15 cents. So this is highly capital inefficient. We were basically operating we were losing 85 cents for every dollar we created. We can think also of banana in this case as debt in a way. So we were basically losing money every time. And well, return over emissions, in my opinion, is kind of the North Star of the B free DEXs, or actually most DEXs except Uniswap, which they just don't care about this. They just give all the money to liquidity providers, but they also don't have emissions. They lately created some sort of incentives program, but well, nevertheless, in my opinion, that is what sets the efficiency of the DEXs. And well, with this analysis, which in many cases you can find such analysis in token terminal, even though Well, no, I don't think you can find it in token terminal. In token terminal, you can find the price to sales, which gives you like an interesting perspective of the efficiency of the model. But to compute return or emissions on a high level, you basically have a given week. Let's say, I don't know, let's say Aerodrome prints $16 million per week. Okay, so how much fees Aerodrome generates in a week? Okay, it generated $6 million in its all-time highs in weeks. So they are basically running at roughly 30% of return on emissions. So they are operating at a 70% loss. Even though I did eyeball this is like pretty close to reality. That's how Aerodrome operates. They actually print about 3 more times the money that the fees that they generate. In contrast, protocols like Linux, Tina, and Equalizer are operating in ranges of 70 to 110%. So historically speaking, I'm being fully transparent, Linux only had 3 fully profitable epochs that the return on emissions was over 100%. Our average is 80% of return or emissions, which is widely above the average of the B33 DEXs. I'm personally happy about this. And also, like going back to the previous conversation, like the return or emissions is kind of like, in a way, it's a simple metric, but it's also pretty dumb in the sense that it also doesn't account for how much tokens you are locking in that given day, in that given week. So it's basically absolute emission value versus absolute rewards value, which is fees plus price. But when you factor how many tokens you are locking in that way, in that week, or instead of doing return or emissions, you do return over inflation, which is how much your circulating supply is growing for that given week, the actual number is way more favorable. Nevertheless, I think it's nice to have like an ambitious North Star. So I'm going like on the pessimistic. Let's say I look this metric in the most pessimistic way. And I think that the end goal is to actually have over 100% of return on emissions, valuing the emissions at the link's price. And well, that is, in my opinion, how you analyze the efficiency. So in other words, it's total emissions divided total rewards that the B token holders receive for that given week.
Okay, that was a very in-depth, run through of these, and I completely somehow second that. That ideally, the North Star will be to generate more revenue to the or compared with emission, therefore going above 100%. But the question is how the price, the token price, can influence that, right? Because if the token price spike, this also have an impact on this ratio. Is that correct, or I'm analyzing things in the wrong way?
No, this is 100% correct. And also, like something that came up during our historical analysis is that when Linux was at its highest price and where Linux had like sharp price increases in terms of return over emissions, it was potentially like our worst weeks. Yeah. It basically was one of our worst weeks, which actually also going back into efficiency, it recently sparked a internal conversation, which was also some of the learnings we had during the ApeSwap days, which is about liquidity elasticity or liquidity stickiness. Like when your token like price pumps like crazy, let's say you have 2 million in TVL on ETHUSDC, this 2 million is happy at 80% APR. Suddenly your token 2x's, you have 160% APR, and you still have the same amount of liquidity. Like so sometimes like this liquidity like doesn't necessarily expand at the same speed that your token price potentially expands, and this could be seen as wasteful emissions. And on the other hand, it can also go in the other direction. Like suddenly you have this 2 million in liquidity, the token goes down, you go to 60% APR, 50% APR, and you still have the same liquidity. And with this, you can like do the analysis of how sticky this liquidity is, how they price the APR, and then use this information to model your emissions in the most efficient way So like one of the conclusions we had and something that we are looking into is like, well, maybe if the token has a sharp price increase and we don't believe that the liquidity can expand at the same velocity of the price, then maybe we should lower the emissions for the next week so that the emissions and the liquidity expands in a sustainable way. So it doesn't really hurt our like basic. So to your question, so that price going up doesn't hurt return or emissions. And I think this is also something many Solidly forks are missing, where, yeah, like price going up is inversely proportional to return or emissions. So I think that having more malleable emissions where you can like adjust to the stickiness and liquidity elasticity of your protocol can help have a consistent return or emissions regardless of sharp token price action.
Yeah, and I think it has been, it gave me a lot to think about. It's a little bit mind blowing to enter specifically in that. So I think I do agree with you, and I'm wondering if there shouldn't be a method to actually try to stabilize yield, right? So yield stabilization, it means exactly what you were describing before. So if the token price goes up, dramatically, and the velocity of the liquidity doesn't follow at the same speed, you can basically cut emission. You can save it for the rainy days. And at the same time, if the token potentially goes down, and therefore also the APY is going to go down, you can reallocate some of the emissions that you have been saving in order to keep the yield, still attractive. Is this something that you are experimenting with, or do you know any other team that is experimenting in this specific direction?
So we actually did this in the ApeSwap days. We actually managed to lower emissions by almost 60% without losing TVL following this methodology, and saved a lot of emissions for rainy days. So you call it. Then in terms of like B free protocols or DEXs in general, I haven't seen it on the market. Nevertheless, like as you pointed out, like it can also be like a double-edged sword, and that's also why I'm kind of afraid of this, because following this methodology, it means that you expand emissions when the token goes down, and that can potentially be a death spiral. And that is something that is a little bit scary about this methodology. Yeah, when the token goes up, it's easy. I lower emission, maybe token keeps going up, everyone is happy. But following this methodology, you would also need to increase it when it goes down. And I find that to be kind of a contradiction over having like this kind of sustainable tokenomics. And I think that is kind of the missing piece, because yeah, it's very easy to decrease it, but it's definitely hard to increase it.
Okay, would you say that you can that would be less impactful a method where you are not really increasing the type of emission, but you're just reallocating emission that you managed to save during a moment of price spike?
Yeah, I mean, let's say like you are not gonna increase your total yearly emissions with this model. Let's say you are actually saving the emissions. I mean, there are many perspectives or way to analyze it, but even if we say that, okay, we are not increasing the yearly emissions, we are just saving emissions for the when the APR is below the expected APR to make our liquidity providers happy. But nevertheless, the effect on the token might be the same, because you're basically supplying increased offer into the market of your token. So you expand the offer side of the token in a time where there is less demand, because if the token is going down, we can assume that there is less demand. So expanding the offer of the token in times of less demand, while it might make sense in the liquidity elasticity model, it might not make sense in let's keep the token healthy for the long-term model, or whatever we want to call it. So that's where it becomes tricky to apply this approach. But we're gonna get there, and this is something that is processing.
What about if you have saved emission, you basically decide to burn token when the price of token goes down, and removing them from the circulation?
I mean, burning Burning tokens that never reach circulation at most has a psychological impact.
Yeah.
I'm not generally like I don't believe too much in burning tokens. I mean, I definitely believe in taking tokens out of circulation, but if the tokens were never out of circulation, it's like just like a tweet and a news and an announcement,
Yeah,
and not something that materially is going to impact the market behavior, at least in
Yeah.
the long term.
It's more
PancakeSwap
marketing,
used
basically.
to used to do something like that, right?
Yeah, that's what I was
Yeah,
thinking.
we also did with ApeSwap. That's how we did like a potential token value accrual. It was very similar to the PancakeSwap model where we take 30% of the total trading fees, and once per quarter we took all the money from this 30% and we used it to buy back and burn the token, which in my opinion it indirectly generates value accrual for the token holders because it's making their tokens more scarce and more valuable. But during this approach, we were taking the tokens out of the liquid market. Like we were taking literal tokens out of circulation, which is different from burning tokens that never reached circulation.
Yeah, completely on the same page. Okay, I think that it was an incredible, jump in this rabbit hole of emission yield and elasticity of this emission. I think it was super fantastic. I think we all agree, that the Solidly DEXs have a strong advantage in a way because they are basically built to create a flywheel. They're basically flywheel DEXs, right? And therefore, at the beginning, they do have, in my opinion, an advantages on, I don't know, classic the others, let's say, models in bootstrapping liquidity and continue to bootstrap this liquidity, over time. But my question would be, what kind of downside do you see in this specific model, and how do you plan to address it with Linux or other failings of the family?
Great.
So that's a great question. Well, if you want to take it, Thomas, first.
No, I just want to say that always the drawdown that I found for this type of model is the locking the tokens for a period of time. It's something that always in DeFi space people are not pleased to, and also that's one of the things. And also I think user experience would be the second one. But well, of course, as Guru explained, Linux is addressing this. And a good thing I think to think or to discuss would be what would happen if one day Uniswap decided to turn on the fee switch and they actually started distributing revenue. If this is gonna kill this type of model, or if the solidly type of model is still gonna be being used, you know.
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess it depends a lot in how Uniswap does implement this, if, when, and also how, if they are actually going to be able to be competitive with this. And also, like they can have a fee switch for token holders, but that doesn't mean that they are actually going to have emissions or governance. Like Uniswap is clearly non-inflationary. So even if they do have a fee switch, like all this fee switch is going to be an incentive for token holders, not for liquidity providers. And at the end of the day, like the competition is for the liquidity providers because like if you have the liquidity providers, you have the fees, and if you have the fees, you have demand for the token holders. So Uniswap turning on the fee switch doesn't necessarily make Uniswap LP more appealing. So I don't see that as a massive threat for the liquidity providers and for the be free model. Nevertheless, anything could happen. But I'm also like not super bullish on multi-chain DEXs. Like I except for some very specific cases, in generally multi-chain DEXs don't achieve any sort of meaningful dominance, TVL, or fee. Generally, they have a home base, they dominate in their home base, and then when they do multi-chain, it's just like a marketing initiative, because at the end of the day, there is like a limit to the team capacity, a limit to the marketing capacity, and most than anything, there is a limit to the token incentives and value accrual you can provide across multiple chains. And this is why I'm not necessarily seeing like the multi-chain approach being massively competitive in this regard. But of course, things can change over time. And then going back to the original question about the challenges of this model, I see it mostly from the tokenomics perspective, which for me it's like what matters the most. And for me, it's literally like the previous conversation, in my opinion. Like the biggest challenge is how you balance return on emissions with token price action to make sure that you are long-term sustainable while also taking care of your token holders. I think that is the biggest challenge. And I think that Linux addresses it in high regard by two things. I think that the delegation system and empowering the managers to basically maximize the profitability of B-Links holders greatly helps balance return on emissions with token value. And on the other hand, we have the options liquidity mining, which is kind of unique to Linux, even though we do have OG Velocimeter. They don't have as much credit as they deserve. Let's fucking go. Big shout out to Velocimeter Microcap. They kind of implement all of this before anyone else in the shadows. But anyway, on Linux, we have these two edges. And well, what options liquidity mining does, it distributes the emissions or the inflation to liquidity providers in an options token that has basically two paths. You can choose to buy Link's token at a 60% discount. Basically, 60% of Link's value is going to be your APR. Or if you want to maximize your value to 100%, you can max lock into B-Links. This creates like stronger incentive to actually participate in governance and max lock your emissions to maximize the value. Nevertheless, like if you still want to get the cash or the value right away, you can still enjoy a 60% APR. And the beauty of this is that the 40% that the liquidity provider is paying to redeem this asset comes into USDC into the protocol treasury or the protocol options reserves. And this USDC has many allocations. So far, we are still like learning a lot. Nothing is set in stone, but to give an example of how it has been used over the past few months, basically 100% of the USDC that is being generated by the all-links or the options redemptions is being used to take Links tokens out of circulation. So it's basically being used to buy back Links tokens. And then these Links tokens are converted into what we call BBE links. So it's basically bribe B links. It's a B links ERC20 representation that basically the only thing that the user can do with this token is turn it into B links. So instead of burning the Linux that we take out of circulation, we turn it into max locked B links. We represent this as an ERC20 token, and then we inject it back into the system in the form of bribes for the voters and the B links holders. So basically for everyone that is redeeming all links, there's definitely some links inflation. Nevertheless, for B-Links holders, this inflation is offset by the fact that we are taking the links out of circulation and then giving it back to the B-Links holders in the form of BB links. So this helps protect the B-Links holders from the dilution that the all-links generates for each inflation, and also it helps being more resilient in terms of return on emissions because this 40% that the user pays, it's also a return over the emissions that were generated.
Okay, that's I didn't know exactly how this was working, so I'm very, very satisfied to learn this new part. I mean, it was clear.
Well, that BB links needed to come out of somewhere.
Yeah, that one. I didn't know that. I know, of course, it's clear how the option works, right? So essentially there is obviously an incentive to max lock and to lock instead of course, redeeming and selling. And this is obviously a clear mechanism. I didn't know there were basically essentially is the 40% generating BBE links that then are redistributed to the V token holders. Okay, very interesting. Okay, all right. So in essence, balancing out this whole mechanism is the real challenge, essentially, because okay, you have great power, but with great power, as usual, comes great responsibility. So you can, if you increase too much your emission, potentially you can depress the token, the token value, and therefore, you might enter in a situation where if the token value also go down, the value of your emission go down, therefore your yield go down, your liquidity go down, and so on and so forth, and therefore these, let's say, token economy and also option strategy are there in order to create actually the opposite flywheel, where essentially there is a more controlled emission, higher incentive for locking the token, and so on and so forth, and to preserve and support actually the token holders and stakers. Okay, this is very good, very good for the food for thoughts. Okay, and from the different at least it's my feeling that in the last period there have been a lot of new Solidly DEXs out there launching, probably also following a little bit the great success of Aerodrome on Base. You guys are monitoring the space constantly. What do you see out there? Do you see any interesting innovation? Do you see any category or subcategory of Solidly DEXs that are emerging? So how the competitors are building competitivity and new features versus the people that are more, let's say, just following the original V3,3 design?
I think that's something interesting that we're currently seeing, that we also saw with the B token from Curve, is that on Curve you have Convex, that is kind of a liquid token for the B Curve position. And after some time, we're starting to see liquid derivatives being built on top of these protocols. That it's going to be super interesting to see how this type of protocol evolve and how they will drive liquidity into their derivatives. But for sure, it's building Legos on top of these B33 DEXs is a good thing to see. Also because, in my opinion, this will bring adoption from the whole DeFi space, because, as I said before, there's a lot of people that don't like locking their liquidity for some time. And also, in some way, having locked position generates some kind of capital inefficiency on the other side. So being able to have a liquid derivative gives you an opportunity to a new world, new world of possibilities, right?
Okay.
So that's something interesting to see.
Absolutely, I think we have seen live Tena, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Liquid derivatives. We have seen also ABC Ramses, is that correct?
Yeah, now it's the same entity, Abacus, that manages ABC RAM, ABC Cleo, Live D, and soon to come ABC Links. Really soon it's gonna be there on the market. It's actually already liquid, so we are just waiting for some final details over there. So yeah, I think liquid derivatives are definitely something interesting here, and it also helps balance out the lock-in behavior, and it also goes back to some of the previous points that we were talking about, like how to say, user experience. So these liquid derivatives are also like a great unlock for user experience. Like, hey, like you want exposure to the token, you don't want to lock, but you still want the APR. Well, you buy the liquid derivative, you stake it, and you get the APR. You don't have to lock, you don't have to worry about voting. So it definitely is a great enhancement over user experience. Then going back to the original question in terms of like innovations we are seeing around the Solidly DEXs, to be honest, I haven't seen as many as I would like, not gonna lie. I think that the model seems to be like pretty strong. Like for me, like I fell in love with the TINA model and the deep integrations with liquidity managers, which I think it's potentially over a year since they did this. I felt in love with the model and the innovation that Tina brought here with those, and that's where Linux came to life, like as the next iteration of what Tina did with the deep integration with liquidity managers and basically incentivized only managing positions. And another interesting thing that I saw, random tweet, so I don't know if it's gonna be successful, but there is like this pseudo B33 token project or DEX that is going live on Sonic that actually replaces the B tokenomics with a model that actually enables you to instantly exit. So basically, let's say we have the same model where you basically lock your token or change your token to a derivative, you participate in governance, you vote, you get value relative to the governance. This is all the same. But then when you want to exit the token, you can actually instantly exit via a 50% haircut of your token. So if you want to instantly exit, you get a 50% haircut, or you can exit via linear vesting. So instead of deciding the lock time at the beginning, you decide the lock time. The lock time starts when you decide to exit, or if you want to insta exit, you get a 50% haircut, and then this 50% haircut is relocated towards the existing lockers. I found this like an interesting iteration over the Solidly model. It's still not live, but I don't know, talking about something new. This is definitely new. I guess, again, like the ApeSwap flashback. So this reminds me a lot of Golden Banana in a way, where basically to access a Golden Banana, you needed to burn 30% of your banana value when coming in. So basically, when you exited a Golden Banana, you exited at a 30% loss. Nevertheless, Golden Banana, in the case of ApeSwap, gave you access to the highest APRs of all the protocol, and also gave you access to privileged launchpad, basically, so you could get a special launchpad allocation. And well, for some reason, this protocol, it's similar. It's like, okay, if you want the best APR, you want to participate in governance, you need to forfeit 50% of your value or wait a linear vesting to unlock, which I guess that was missing on Banana. I mean, in Golden Banana, the wait was like, okay, you need to farm it until you make your 30% back, basically.
Well, I mean, I have the feeling that ApeSwap was such a battlefield for you, ApeGuru, eh? So you tried so many things.
So
Yeah?
many stuff, yeah. Golden Banana patented by ApeGuru.
You know, Guru, there's something that Deal used to have on Pickle Finance. There was a there was a decaying mechanism of a fee if you wanted to exit your position. So let's say in the first, I don't know, 50% of the period you have to pay like a fixed fee, and afterwards was like a decaying fee if you wanted to exit your position before the token unlocked. So that would be also something cool to see.
Definitely. And also, now that you say that, it reminds me to Tapioca DAO. Poor guys, they got recently exploited. Hope everyone stayed safe over there. But well, Tapioca DAO actually has like also, it's not big tokenomics, it's also no option token, but it's similar in a way where like the options and the lock period is constantly rebalancing relative to supply and demand. So the more people lock, the longer the max lock. The less people that lock, the lower the max lock. And also the rewards, I think it's OTAP, has a similar mechanic on how the options actually work. I can't really describe it in detail right now because like I don't have it in the top of my mind. It was like pretty complex Giga brain math stuff. But basically they managed the locks relative to demand to determine max and min lock and also voting power of the locks. And they did the same with the options, which I found super intriguing. They actually wrote some pretty good papers over this. They've been developing for many, many years, creating this omni-chain stablecoin, which I'm pretty sad that they got exploited. Hopefully they can come back. But the people behind Tapioca definitely did some interesting tokenomics. So for those tokenomics geeks, I do recommend a lot going over the Tapioca Mirror, which is where they write their articles. Like there's like some pretty giga brain stuff on how to model options and token locks.
And now we're seeing chains. Now
What?
We're seeing mode. Now we're seeing mode with the V mode mechanism for points, right? Instead of doing points incentives, they're doing B mode, where you have to vote on protocols to drive rewards to protocols. So it's something interesting to see also, right?
Yeah, I guess at this point we can also bring up Verachain,
Yeah.
famous proof of liquidity. In my opinion, like Verachain is basically be free at the blockchain level.
Yeah.
So you basically lock your Vera tokens to vote for the emissions and vote for the validators. The validators allocate the emissions, and then you receive the emissions proportionally to how efficient they were, how many fees they generated. So it's kind of like they slapped the free model on a blockchain level, which I'm definitely very, very eager to see how that works. It's going to be super efficient. But yeah, it's kind of I feel like they saw the Arbitrum short-term incentive program and how like, I don't know, inefficient that was. And it's like, hey, what if we automate this and do it all via on-chain governance, and the actual incentive to participate in governance is how efficient these emissions are. So like, I think it's definitely like an interesting model and something that I'm going to be monitoring closely. Personally, I'm not building on Vera chain yet. I'm more like a wait and see how it goes. And then relative to how it goes and relative to the insights I see, I might decide to build on that ecosystem.
Absolutely. I'm also so excited to see what is going to happen there. And I am deeply surprised that we don't have sort of fork of better chain, or at least forking the economic model, because something that at least...
Well, what Mode is doing, I think that what Thomas mentioned, in my opinion, is like Mode trying to copy Vera chain.
Okay, V-Mode, so that we're working with Aragon, right? To define all the token economy and stuff, correct?
I'm not sure, to be honest.
V-Mode, right?
Yeah, V-Mode, yeah.
OP stack is still an OP stack. Okay. Yeah. So we're talking about the same thing.
Yep.
All right. Okay. Well, super interesting. Just now a question, for the degen out there. Huh? Always, respect the degen, and celebrate the degen. You that you are building protocols, of course, you probably know very, very well how to use them. So if you would need to suggest a degen strategy to maximize your return on Linux, for example, what would it be? So what would you suggest to people in order to maximize their return on investment?
So I'm going to share what I personally do, which in my opinion is fairly straightforward. So on Linux, we have like the single-sided staking positions where you basically deposit one asset. So it's currently working with ETH, USDC, USDT, and Stone, which is an ETH derivative token. So in these single-sided assets, you just deposit this single token. Nevertheless, you are still a liquidity provider. So your principal, let's say the asset that is deposited, is protected to 70%. So your position will always be at least 70% this token. Sometimes it fluctuates, but it generally in a short period of time, it goes over 70%. And in most often than not, it's actually above 70%. So then, like as a liquidity provider, this generally provides like the best APRs, and it has low exposure to impermanent loss. And then the way I generate a flywheel with this is like, let's say you have a billings position, or you become a liquidity provider. Here you start earning O-links. You use your O-links to start building a billings position. Then with your billings position on a weekly basis, you're going to be generating ETH, USDT, USDC, and RAPBTC. So here is where also the flywheel comes in and the beauty of this model. So with your liquidity position, you're generating billings. And with your billings, you're generating blue chips. So then the blue chips that you generate with your billings, what I do is like I compound them back into my liquidity position. So basically my liquidity position becomes bigger. It starts generating more O-links via the fees that I compound there. Then what I do is like, again, I take the O-links from this position, I put it back into my billings. Now my billings is bigger, it's generating more fees. Then again, like the fees that I generated, I put it back into the liquidity position. And basically you have this symbiotic loop where you are constantly generating more blue chips. So it's not that you're like only exposed to Links token, but you're also generating your billings value accrual position that generates blue chips over time consistently. So by doing this loop, I do believe that you maximize your yield, you get exposure to the protocol token, but you're also semi-conservative in the sense that you're keeping your blue chips and putting them into the liquidity position to keep the flywheel going.
Okay, well, that's also the strategy we are using. You generate more, more O links. You max lock then on more, and therefore your billings position increase. Therefore you get more emission. You basically continue to recompound this emission in the pools that you are basically already in, and in particular in your strategy, the single-sided one managed by Ichi, if I remember correctly. Yes.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. All right. That was very good. We always need to provide a little bit of love also to the degen out there. And just maybe you want to spend a couple of words about the new felon now. So there is, it was already announced on Twitter. As far as I know, there is also an airdrop going on. So what's up? What's up with OZLX?
That's a great question. So as I mentioned earlier, we're not necessarily super bullish on the multi-chain single brand approach. So under this train of thought, we are launching a franchise model, and OZLX is going to be the first feline of our franchise. OZLX is going to be launching on Circuit, and it's going to come with the OCX token and the BE OCX token, and of course options OZLX too. And well, we are super bullish on Circuit. I think they have amazing technology. Transaction fees are super low. They are a security-first blockchain that can actually block malicious transactions in real time. They are backed by the best, and they also have like almost 2 billion in TVL, in pre-staked TVL, which I find super bullish. And then on the airdrop stuff, like a little bit of alpha, like roughly 45%, not roughly, like literally 45% of the initial OZLX token supply is going to go to billings holders, linearly proportional to their max lock, their lock value actually, and only those who have over 1 year lock are going to qualify into this position. And this basically, like in some rough math, it translates that if you have a max lock position, you are going to receive roughly 33% of your billings tokens in OZX tokens. So if you have 1 million billings voting power, you're going to get 333,000 OCX tokens on the airdrop. Which in my opinion presents like a great opportunity to get extra early exposure to OZLX. And it's kind of free money. Like if you're bullish on Linux, you can basically get your billings. And on top of this, you're gonna get 33% of your tokens in OZLX, which could present like a pretty good opportunity as relative to the potential launch valuation. In absolute dollar value, is going to be more likely closer to 50%. So you would get like a boost on 50% of your billings dollar value.
Okay. Wow. Not financial advice, but smell bullish here. It's very good.
It's quite bullish. Yeah.
Obviously super bullish. Okay, fantastic. Therefore, let's say the simple strategy would be just buy links, lock for more than a year or 2 years, or max lock, whatever.
Yeah, 2 years, like the max lock or the 2 years is like what translates to like 33% of absolute token amount relative to your links token amount. Like if you are in 1 year, it's gonna be half of this.
Okay, that's very, very interesting. Okay, now let's go a little bit toward the conclusion of this fantastic discussion. I want to ask you a little bit more the dreamy question, right? What comes next for apart from OZLX, right? That is a certainty at this point. But what comes next for Solidly, and what comes next in general for the DEX world?
So that's a great question. I generally like keep a very, very lean mindset. So I mean, I do like to speculate in multi-year stuff, but that is mostly from the investment side, from the business side. I like to see like stuff that works and look into potential enhancements and iterations. Particularly on the DEX side of things, I do feel it's a little bit stagnant. Like since the inception of concentrated liquidity, like there is like this kind of sense or kind of vibe where like we have maximized on-chain capital efficiency with concentrated liquidity. Of course, we do have hooks, but so far, like the traction behind hooks is kind of minimal. So it's still like kind of TBD to see how meaningful hooks are going to be. Additionally, hooks are like just like, I don't know, a little bit of sugar on top of concentrated liquidity. Like concentrated liquidity is still the meat. So right now, like I'm not visualizing that much innovation in the DEX space. I mean, we do have a order book basically, but like when I look at existing order book solutions, like none of them really have traction. So it's hard for me to say, oh yeah, order book DEXs are the future because they are not making significant volume compared to non-order book DEXs. And it's not that order book DEXs came yesterday. I mean, they have been on the market for years and they are still not really competitive relative to AMMs. So again, like I don't see order books DEXs like being the future, but that also can change with further innovation. Nevertheless, specifically on the Solidly or the B token things, or even in the token logs or cash flow assets, I think there's like a lot of opportunity in this area. I think that the utilization of this kind of, I think that these assets are kind of underutilized. You are basically locking your liquidity to access to the future cash flow of this protocol. And as a capital efficiency maxi, I think this is highly capital inefficient. So I do believe there's like a big opportunity to actually create something around this locking mechanic, find a way to leverage this cash flow. And this is something that has been on my mind for a long time. So hopefully cooks are on the kitchen and something will eventually come out. But I do think there's still a lot of room to build like meta protocol on top of B tokens that leverage this cash flow to enhance the utility of these assets and untap this locked liquidity.
Hopefully someone will build it, right? So you just hope that things will go in the direction pretty soon. What about, just a follow-up question, what about, I've seen several teams starting to experiment with the hybrid models, like for example perennials, that they are more in the area of derivatives, but they are experimenting with integration between AMM and club in order to, potentially create try to get the best from both worlds. Have you heard something in this direction, or maybe it's too early to tell?
So for me, it's too early to tell. I've seen a few DEXs implement both club and AMM, and none of these have gained traction so far. It might generally also like basically like liquidity fragmentation, it's like a massive problem across the whole industry, multiple layer ones, multiple layer twos. And when you do club plus AMM, you are basically doing liquidity fragmentation in the application level, which is like as far as you can go in terms of like liquidity fragmentation. So I also don't find it very EV plus to have to split your liquidity providers among two liquidity sources. But time will tell. Time will tell.
Okay. Let's see how these things will evolve. And if people want to continue to follow you guys on a personal level and potentially following Linux and also OSLX, how can they do it? What's the best way to keep in touch with you?
So you can find me on Twitter under ApeGurus, Linux.fi for Linux, OSLX.fi for OSLX, and that's kind of it. I am ApeGurus on Twitter, Telegram, and GitHub, so pretty easy to find me.
Thomas?
Great. Yeah, you can find me in Twitter at Tommy, CHAIA _. And that's my Twitter, and yeah, I prefer to keep it that way. Otherwise, in Telegram, it's TommyVE.
Okay. Well, guys, it has been an incredible run through. Really, we went so deep that at some point I didn't see the surface anymore. Right? We were diving at 300 meters under the Solidly model ocean. It was extremely exciting, a great learning experience for me, and I'm sure it is also for all our audience, all our listeners. And I can't, express enough of my gratitude to both of you for being here and for helping us to learn more about the beautiful world of Solidly.
Thank you for having us. It was my pleasure to be here. So thanks for the invitation. And yeah, I really enjoyed sharing my thoughts on this topic.
Thank you very much, Alessio. Glad to be here also, and hope we can get more people into this amazing space.